شكرا لكل منكم يا عفراء وسحر وراشد. دعونا الآن نتحدث بالتفصيل عن العوائق التي قد تمنعك من تحقيق نجاحك في ريادة الأعمال. سيخبرك أي رائد أعمال أن النضال اليومي أمر لا مفر منه، وغالبا ما يؤثر سلبا على الصحة العقلية. سيحدثنا الدكتور نايف المطوع مؤسس مركز السور عن أهمية صحتك العقلية للنجاح في الأعمال التجارية. تفضل يا دكتور نايف، المسرح تحت أمرك.
Thank you, Afra, Sahar, and Rashid. I think it was a very important conversation because we were talking to entrepreneurs who are still trying to figure it out, not necessarily people who have made it just yet. And I think a lot of us are in that stage where we're still finding ourselves in our own fields. Let's now go into more detail about the blocks that might be stopping you from realizing your entrepreneurial success. Any entrepreneur will tell you that day in and day out, the struggle is real, and it often takes a toll on your mental health. We will now hear from Dr. Naif Al-Mutawa, founder of the Sur Center, about why your mental well-being is crucial for your success in your business. Dr. Naif, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you. I'm going to start with an ending and come back to the beginning. And the ending basically is I just moved here for my latest startup called Tuhoon. Hawin Hao Tuhoon, Hawni Hao Tuhoon. It's a meditation, mindfulness, psychotherapy app for the region, done in the Arabic language, not a classical Arabic, a very what we call white Arabic. I'm a professor at the medical school at Kuwait University. I've also been practicing as a psychologist in 6 countries. I'm licensed here in Dubai, Qatar, Bahrain, etc. So I wanted to start with that, just to give you an idea, and then bring you back full circle as what I'm doing. And very much part of my practice these days is something called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is how do you change the way that you think to change the way you feel. And I learned that actually 7-8 years ago because I was going through the most stressful times of my life. Those of you who know parts of my story might know that I used to speak a lot at these summits. Actually, this is the first one I've spoken at now in almost 10 years. I stopped. I stopped because I focused inwards, focused on mental health rather than the other stuff. What I did before was very exciting. I built something called the 99, which are superheroes. They're on television all over the world. Did very well for a while and then got caught up in the middle of the perfect storm of issues. I had a couple of fatwas. I had death threats from ISIS that my mother found out about on the front page of Kuwait's newspapers. I had Human Rights Watch calling me, telling me not to go back home. I had back home calling me saying, where are you? I had my lawyer saying, if you show up to the airport, they're going to take you to jail. And I still had no idea what I had done. I went back home. I was on trial for 1.5 years for blasphemy. I won. The courts proved I believed in God. How, I'm not sure. But it was a very stressful time. Now, in the middle of all this, I happened to slip and break my ankle. Had 3 surgeries. And so you can imagine the threats, the stress of this company that I had built that all of a sudden exploded in front of my eyes. The 3 surgeries on my leg. I was very angry. I was very stressed. I was not in a good place. And I could see from the reactions I was having around my children. I have 6 boys, by the way. And when I get asked in the US, what about the girls? I say, we don't talk about them. I don't have any girls. I wish. But basically, what happened is I found myself just really reacting. And there's one thing that I know well, is that one thing that I'm very good at is being a student. And so I went back to school in New York. I was living in New York during my surgeries. I spent a year doing surgeries there. And so I learned cognitive behavioral therapy, which is actually also part of this app that we're launching, which basically at its very core is something like, how do I change the way I think to change the way I feel? How do I go from unhealthy, negative emotions to healthy, negative ones? So what I chose to do in this keynote is not just tell you kind of about my journey, but I want to talk to you and teach you a way to think that brought me out of my stress, and I still use today, not only with my patients, but also my personal life. And the idea is, how do I become an actor in my life and not a reactor? Right? Because the thing is, when we have what's called an unhealthy negative emotion, anger, depression, anxiety, guilt, our sympathetic nervous system kicks in and we either fight or flight, right? There's no third option. And we heard many speakers talk about that today. So what I want to teach you now in a few minutes is basically how do I get to the point where I'm in the middle, so I can be more creative about my decisions. So how to become annoyed instead of angry, worried or concerned instead of anxious, sad or disappointed instead of depressed, feel remorse instead of guilt, so I don't go into fight or flight. So at the core of this is something we call the ABC. The A is the thing that happens, an event. Okay? So for example, I have 6 boys. I told you my third one, number 19, I used to get angry at him a lot. So let's say he did something, right? Whatever it is. So I get angry. So you ask yourself in that situation as an entrepreneur, as a parent, as a friend, if 100 people were in that situation right now, would all 100 feel the same way that I do? Chances are probably not. So the question becomes, what am I telling myself that's amplifying this? So we look at what's called your irrational belief. Now irrational in our conversation here is different than outside this room. Here, any belief you have, if it leads to an unhealthy negative emotion, anger, depression, anxiety, guilt, we consider it irrational, even if it's rational. Okay? It's made up of 4 parts. The first is a demand. That investor shouldn't have wasted my time. My employees shouldn't have done that thing they did. I should be profitable. It's okay to want what you want. Never give up what you want. But when you demand something outside your control, you become either angry or anxious or both. So we learn to change demands to preferences. I wish I had been profitable. It would be preferable if I had raised that round of financing, but not a demand, not a must or should. The second is frustration and tolerance. I can't stand it. It should have happened. I can't stand it. We learn to change I can't stand it to I don't like it, but I can stand it. Typically when somebody comes to see me and I ask them on a scale of 1 to 10 how bad they feel about that situation that's stressing them out, they'll say, 8, 9, 7. But when I ask them, what if 10 is reserved for God forbid you had found out on that same day that somebody you love is dying? What would happen to your 7, 8, 9? Typically comes down. So we learn, because as human beings, we do what's called HTA. We say things are horrible, terrible. We learn to say it's bad, right? It could be bad you didn't get funded. It could be bad that you lost your company, but it's not horrible. If it's horrible, it wouldn't have come down, okay? And the fourth thing is rate behaviors, not people. So we want to say, for example, I have a bad manager. So I have a manager who's done a bad thing, okay? So that investor should have invested. It's terrible. I can't stand it. What a bad person this is. So you ask yourself 3 questions that are very important to challenge. Question 1 is, does thinking that way help me? Not is it right or wrong, because the behavior is wrong. But when you think that way, you get angry in a fight with the person, it's not going to help you. Question 2, who says that person should have done X, Y, and Z? Is there a law? Typically not, right? And question 3, is it logical they're going to act according to how they see the world or how you see the world? So you reframe it to, I wish the person had done this. I wish I'd raised the financing. I wish I'd done the money. I wish my company hadn't gone bankrupt. I don't like it, but I can stand it. This person's done a bad thing. They're not a bad person, and bring it back down. So why am I sharing this with you? I'm sharing this with you because this is kind of the number one thing I share with anybody who comes to me, no matter what the issue is. Now, since Corona, I am a practicing clinical psychologist, and Corona, just things shot up in terms of the number of cases that we've seen. And the research that I've done during that time period is informing the pain points we're going after in the application. So I'll bring it up, I'll answer some questions on stage in a bit during the panel. But one thing that I found that's very important here in the region is that we're not just a region of kind of looking for people who have expertise. We look for people by name. And so I got to the point where I'm not scalable, but I'm able to kind of, through my partnership now with Faraz Ghandour, who's my co-founder, and the amazing team that we've put together, kind of take these learnings, take these 25 years of learnings, not just myself, but we have meditators out of Saudi, and it's a very GCC-based product to try to get people to calm, basically. Tuhoon. So my journey, kind of, this is the first time back into the startup world where I took myself out. I'll leave you with 2 stories. The first is just to kind of, one of the reasons I actually moved here is in the middle of all my issues in Kuwait in 2014, Sheikh Hamid here brought me and gave me the Islamic Economy Award for Media for the same project I was being harassed in Kuwait. And the second story I'm going to leave you with, which is when I first came to Dubai to see my first patient here, and this is why it's important to be culturally sensitive to stuff. She was 16, her mother was outside, and she says to me, Doctor, I'm going to tell you something, but you can't tell my mother. I said, okay. She said, Doctor, أحب أرمس مع الشباب. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't know what irmis means. It can mean anything, right? So I'm like, termisin, huh? And then I found out it meant chatting. I'm like, oh, thank God. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, and looking forward to exploring stuff on the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naif. Please take your seat. Doctor, please take your seat while again I invite Craig Mcdonald, co-founder of YallaParking, and Amna Al-Haddad, the UAE Olympic weightlifter, and the moderator Triska Hamid, editorial director of Wamda, for a panel discussion on how to rethink the hustle and grind of being an entrepreneur. Triska, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Now, just a short introduction. Since the pandemic, we have seen a surge in conversations around mental health and greater openness around the topic. We've also seen a rise in the number of health tech startups regionally focusing on mental health and well-being. But while taking time out, looking after one's mental health and preventing burnout have become hot topics and encouraged, is the same empathy afforded to others? Do we have the same openness when others want to take time out, or does it become an inconvenience? Wamda did a survey recently to look at the state of mental health among founders, and we found that founders typically endure higher stress levels when compared to the general population and are twice as likely to develop depression. More than a third of founders in the region rate their mental health as bad. 55% of entrepreneurs said that raising investment has caused them the most stress, followed by scaling their business and the pandemic. So to discuss the grind of being an entrepreneur in the region, we have, you all met Dr. Naif, Craig Mcdonald, who is co-founder of YallaParking, now known as FlexiPark, or FlexiParking. FlexiPark, and Amna Al-Haddad, who qualified for the UAE Olympics as a weightlifter and has a waxwork of her at Madame Tussauds in Dubai, the first UAE female athlete to do so. So, Craig, let's start with you and your story of being a founder. Why is it so stressful being an entrepreneur?
So it's, you know, that's obviously a loaded question. It's very different for different people. For me, I specifically became my business, which is a very dangerous thing to do. You know, you know, physically live and die by how well your startup is doing in that week, in that month, in that quarter, specifically in the early stage where literally one decision can make or break. I think a lot of founders get into this, you know, really bad headspace because they tie their whole self-worth to their business. And I know I certainly did. That's, I think, comes from being ambitious, right? As a first port of call to say, listen, I'm doing this because I think I can. You know, there's obviously this like internal dialogue specifically with me that sometimes goes against that thought. But you know, you're essentially doing it because you believe that you can, and it's really hard to do. You know, build something from zero, make it successful. And then, you know, you get into the headspace, well, if my business is not successful or it's not going as well as I wanted it or think it can, then it must be down to me. And I think that's, you know, that's why it becomes so stressful. I'm talking just for context with, you know, relatively young, you know, no kids. I have a lovely wife, but no kids. So, you know, that did become my child, my company. And, you know, you put everything into it, and at the end of the day, if it doesn't go as well, then you kind of have, you know, no other thought than, well, I failed, or this is not going well, and it's because of me.
Okay. I mean, you've got a very interesting story with regards to what happened with YallaParking, but we'll get to that. Dr. Naif, what's it like being on the other side? You've spent many years listening to people's mental health problems. Now you've become a founder. How does it feel?
Listen, so you know, working with people's stress and anxiety and depression for years, and now kind of being on the other side of you know, being in a startup culture where, you know, things are minute by minute sometimes, and, you know, it's different. I've done this in my 20s a couple times. I did in my 30s once. So the 99 I did for 10 years. And then this is my first, I just turned 50 last April, so this is my first time now at this age. And one of the anxieties I had, actually, I talked to my co-founders about a couple of weeks ago, or a couple months ago, was, you know, I'm doing so well, why take that risk now? Why? And I think inherent in that is there's an itch. If you are kind of somebody who is an entrepreneur, it's nothing kind of satisfies you more than going out there, testing the idea, raising the money, getting people interested. This is something I crave it. And so on one end there is the stress element, but on the other end it's addictive in a certain way. But you have to learn how to manage it. So for me, come hell or high water, I will sleep 8 hours. There's nothing that's going to keep me up at night. Nothing is worth it, right? Did I act the same way when I was in my 30s? Not necessarily. But these are things that you learn over time. What works for you? What makes your engine tick in a way that's where you're working smarter, not necessarily harder. And this is kind of one of the things we want to approach, with what we're doing, is building kind of a platform, a community of people to kind of, because a lot of what's missing is, normalizing that, everybody gets stressed. Everybody, during the lockdown, I was working 7 days a week in lockdown, literally 15 hours a day, because 20-30% of my patients who I hadn't seen in years relapsed during the lockdown. So now, recently, I can take half days off on Friday. It's been like 3-4 months now, where I can stop work at 2 and take the rest of the day off. But I couldn't do that before. So that's.
It was almost a status symbol before of being so busy that you had no time for anything. But I think the pandemic slightly changed that and made people kind of pursue their dreams or look at their lives differently. Amna, you certainly did that. So tell us a bit more about your journey.
Is this working? Oh, great, perfect. First, hi everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak today. So my journey started when I was a journalist. I was a full-time journalist, and I used to, work full-time and everything. And then one day I realized that, my mental health was suffering, and I wanted to do something about it. So I decided to go and just join a gym. And through that experience, I felt that there is so much more that I can do myself as Amna. So I decided to focus on a sport, and that's what I did. And I started to pursue Olympic weightlifting full-time. And it was a very interesting experience because once you pursue your passion, there is always assumption that it will be great, it will be fun, it will be a lot of joy. What we don't realize sometimes once we decide to pursue a journey or a passion of ours is that there are going to be uncertainties, there are going to be obstacles, and they might make us realize, is that something I really want to do, or is it just something I was doing for fun? And is it something that I'm truly passionate about, or is it just what everybody else is doing? And that's how it kind of all started.
So when you started pursuing weightlifting, how did that help you overcome your depression?
So with me is that it was a very interesting journey. So I actually started sports because I was depressed, not because I wanted to heal myself. I wanted to, with exercise, you feel good, you feel good hormones, and that is very, very true. But there's also on the other side of things is when you're overtraining, you can actually depress your nervous system. So I also dealt with depression while I was an athlete because I was overtraining. And sometimes coaches don't realize that, what your capacity is, and that's how they learn, by overloading you and see what you can do. Through that journey, I learned a lot about myself, how to use, I don't like to use positive thinking, but more like, just have more awareness on how to redirect and reframe my thoughts and my feelings, like you were mentioning in your talk, how to make it less of a big deal. It's not always about like, yes, I'm angry, but I can be just a little bit annoyed instead of angry. So that's exactly what I learned throughout my journey as an athlete.
Or like we say, Tuhoon, right? That's exactly it. A lot of times when you just kind of minimize the thing, and you brought up yourself that this must happen. One of the things, never give up on what you want, but the higher the expectation that it's going to happen, we need to separate the expectation things happen versus the desire for them to happen. Anything you want is fine, but the thing is, you go into fight or flight, and there's less creative ways in which to get to what you want to get to when you're in that mode.
Craig, I guess your equivalent of overtraining was overworking. So what happened with YallaParking? When did you realize that this was going against you?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought, because actually, after having time to reset almost, it's only after the fact that you realize actually I was super burnt out and I was in, not the right frame of mind to be leading a company at the time. But yeah, so just for context, I mean, we started YallaParking in 2016. We raised a little bit of money early on, but then essentially we got to bootstrapping. We grew it for 2 or 3 years, and then the pandemic hit. And our main business model was putting people in parking spaces at work, which obviously affected our company really, really hard. So then, that fight or flight kicks in, and you have to say, well, I'm going to get us through this. And the only reason, or the only kind of solution to that for me was to work harder. Which, looking back on it, is sometimes you have to, and sometimes you actually have to take a step back and think, right, let me look holistically at the business. Let me have a real deep thought about where this company is going, instead of just kind of trying to knock down the wall. So yeah, we did that, and then during the pandemic, we pivoted to FlexiPark. Ironically, it's a much better business now. It's better technology. It's a better product market fit. But it got to the point earlier in the year where I had kind of just hit my wall, and I spoke to my co-founder Harry. We were friends before that, and probably one of our greatest achievements is that we're probably even better friends now after all of this, which I know is important. But we had a very open, honest discussion, and I said, listen, I think the time has come for me to kind of step back, which was a really hard decision after what was 4.5 years of trying to make this work. And I'll kind of frame this to say that we weren't abject failures. We had a growing revenue base in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. We had growing customer base, so it wasn't like we tried something and it didn't work to the point where there was nothing there. But for me, it got to the point where I knew after the fact that I was really unhappy, and I wasn't making the right decisions. I wasn't going about my work the right way, and I literally had to have a step back.
How difficult was that decision to make, to say, I need to take a step back?
Yeah, huge. I mean, everything goes through your mind. You're like, okay, one, I'm a failure. I failed to successfully lead this company into an outcome. Two, you're like, why would you leave now after the hardest part is over, right? After the pandemic, and it looked like our business had an inflection point. If it goes on to succeed even now, I'm thinking, well, it wasn't because of me, because it's happened after the majority of the cool stuff has happened, as a result of me putting in the work, but now the fruits are coming to the forefront, and that's kind of without me in the day-to-day, which, yeah, just everything goes through your mind. Like, it's really hard, it's really emotional.
At the risk of this turning into a therapy session, Dr. Naif, what would you say to him? Like, he sees himself
I
need
it. What I would say, first of all, you can lie down now. What I would say is that based on kind of the keynote I gave, the idea, people typically say I'm a failure. We change that to I'm somebody who failed at something, right? So it's not about being positive, it's about having a healthy negative way of thinking about things, because only then can you kind of be in control of your emotions and be able to take it to the next place. And so that's what I would say.
How did everyone else react? How did your co-founder react when you said, I can't do this anymore?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, we've always had a very honest and open friendship. We are friends first. And there's been times in the business, like every founder or every co-founder will know, where one of you wavers, right? And it's like, maybe previously, Harry had gone through this and we'd worked through it together. This was just another thing that we had to work through together. Harry was like, super supportive, and I thank him for that. Then, I actually put a piece out on my blog, and it was about, my darkest day after leaving, right? And I just broke down in tears one day, and I was like, all of that work for essentially what is nothing. And so many people, honestly, in the hundreds of people, reached out to me to say thank you for reading it. Mostly founders that have been or are going through similar things, and also then investors, where some investors basically spoke really honestly with me, and they said this is something that our portfolio companies have to realize. It's something that we look forward to try and manage, because we know it's becoming more of an issue. Literally the overwhelming response was really positive.
Why, given it's such a prevalent issue, why is it that there aren't more people coming out and talking about the state of their mental health? Who'd like to tackle that?
I can address that. I think we like to uphold ourselves to a certain image, and we are very afraid for that image to change and how that looks like to the world outside. You know, like when you decided to quit, you know, a big part of what I did is I decided to also retire from competing. But people still expected me to compete and be a full-time athlete, but that's your image of me. It's not the person who I've become and the person I've grown to be. So that's, I think, a big part of like mental health, and people not wanting to speak about it, is that they're just afraid of being vulnerable. And it's, you know, and it's not surprising, you know, a lot of people are out there trolling, judging, you know, saying a lot of nasty things to hurt people. And I think now it's becoming more accepting. When you have more people speaking about mental health and their own personal stories, it becomes more relevant and more, it resonates with the audience and people in general. So that is my take on it. And I believe that it starts with us being, first of all, honest with ourselves. Before we are even honest with people, we need to be honest with ourselves and who we are and what makes us, you know, afraid of doing certain things. Is it like a pure fear, or is it just, you know, the anxiety of whether I'm going to achieve or not? And whenever you do anything in life that's different, you know, there's always that uncertainty that, you know, things could go either ways. But the beautiful thing about life is that, you know, there's a lot to explore throughout that journey. And sometimes, yes, our mental health might suffer, but I think, like for me personally, I learned how to deal with my mental health throughout everything that I went through. Not because the goal was to achieve like the Olympics, it was more about how can Amna be better for Amna.
I do wonder if everyone is more open about the state of their mental health, what the wider repercussions will be. I mean, Dr. Naif, is there any sane person in this world, or do we all have an issue? And if everyone is really open, then do we just, I don't know, everyone's just talking about their problems and their anxiety and whatever?
I mean, I think that the thing is, it's not about, you know, is there anybody who's not sane? I think it's, you know, the way I like to think about it is, you know, is the way I'm acting or thinking helpful or hurtful to me? I think when we stay within those bounds, I think it's much easier to kind of take steps towards ending a toxic relationship, or, you know, putting your foot down in terms of your job, or, you know, just kind of these little hacks that can go a long way towards making things better. But I think one thing that's really underestimated is the power of lifestyle changes that can go a long way. Like, for example, you need 8 hours of sleep, you know? I'm used to 6 hours. No, you're not. You know, because when you sleep 6 hours a night for 10 days, it's like you've been up for 24 hours. So in a month, that's 3 days of being up, and imagine the course over the years, right? Because, like, for example, sleep and mental health are a two-way street. If you have problems in your mental health, it's going to impact sleep. But if you're too cool to sleep, it's going to do the opposite, right? And this is what happens. And I see it in Kuwait a lot. I mean here not as much, but I see it a lot. And so a lot of times, you know, it's not about, you know, I have a psychological problem. I'm just making faulty decisions about how to live my life.
I mean, I think we're still a little while away. I'd like to sleep at least 8 hours a night, and I get called lazy still for prioritizing my own sleep and not having an alarm, waking up naturally. But, you know, that's seen as lazy because I'm not in the office at 8:30, 9 a.m. like everybody else. So I think we're a little while away. Craig, in terms of, you know, you took that step to be very open and honest. Did it have any kind of negative repercussions at all? Did it prevent you from doing something different later? Did people view you differently?
No, honestly, no. And I think that was probably what I was most surprised about. You know, I was very tentative on posting my blog, you know, but the overwhelming reaction was like, thank you. You know, as I said before, like founders, investors, all reaching out saying, listen, take some time, you know, we'd love to catch up, see what's next, whatever. So you could even kind of argue that it's been, you know, net positive in terms of that. But yeah, I didn't really get any feedback to say, you know, you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have posted it. But, you know, that comes with learning, you know. I was scared of putting it so open and out there, specifically in this region. You know, I grew up in Dubai, so I know kind of the ins and outs, and that's something that's not really been at the forefront previously. But yeah, in terms of my little circle and within the technology ecosystem, it was well received.
Amna, you used sports to overcome your depression. So what did you do when you had depression as an athlete and suffered in that way? How did you overcome it?
That's a great question. So I had to deload. So we have deload weeks normally when you're an athlete. So even when you're an entrepreneur or when you're doing any kind of business or anything, you're hustling in the hustle culture, it's important to realize there's also time that you need to take to rest and recover. So that's exactly what I had to do. Is I also got really seriously injured just before the Olympic qualifiers. So I actually didn't do any lifting or anything for 2 months, which is actually very detrimental to qualifying for the Olympics. But it's something that I had to do to make sure I am okay enough that I can actually go back and train hard for the Olympic qualifiers. So around that time, my depression was at its peak. I had to decide whether I want to continue this path or not. I've given up so much at that time. You know, I lived abroad. I left my family. I quit my job and everything to pursue this one specific goal. So I had to question myself and ask myself, will I regret, you know, waking up tomorrow and not continue this path? And my answer was yes. So I wanted to continue training till the Olympic qualifiers. And then if that happens, that's fine. If it doesn't happen, that's also fine. I can then redirect and choose a different path that is better for my body and my mental health. So it's okay to change path, redirect. It's okay to find something else that brings you joy. That's one of what I did. I actually took time to, I would say, allow myself to grieve. I allowed myself to grieve, to be able to get better again. And I think that's a very important part of like in life is if you're going through a tough time or through a depression or any kind of mental illness, I think grieving is a very important aspect of allowing ourselves to feel all of our feelings, but not live in them and eventually move on to the next thing that is healthy for us.
Dr. Naif, we're constantly being told to stress less. But is there a way that we can harness that stress to kind of achieve something?
A way that we can attack stress, you said?
Sorry?
I didn't hear you properly, the echo.
I said we're constantly being told to stress less.
Yes.
Stress is a killer. But is there a way that we can harness stress to achieve something at work? And I know, Amna, that you addressed that in the physical sense.
So one thing that we've seen kind of work, and this is part of the reason why we're launching what we're launching in terms of our app, is using meditation, using mindfulness, taking 10 minutes a day to kind of, whether you do it, within your own religious belief system. So, for example, if you're Muslim and you're praying, breathe a little bit more during the prayer. Don't rush it, because that turns into meditation. And if you want to do a secular one, there's stuff to listen to, whether it's our app or Calm or etc., where it's just kind of focusing on the here and now, not because in the end there's the anxiety or stress is about trying to solve a future problem that hasn't happened yet. So it's fiction, right? Depression is about trying to change something in the past. Neither can change. So what you do is you focus on your thoughts, and how can you change your thoughts in a way to kind of bring that down. So I don't preach positivity, because I think there are some situations that are just that you can't be positive in, but doesn't mean you have to be negative, right? You can find a balance to kind of move forward.
Amna, how do you use stress for your kind of athleticism?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
How do you use stress?
How
because
do I use stress?
cortisol is like it rises when you're exercising,
Yeah,
and it can be used to power you,
It's
right?
normal to have stress when you have an event. You use that stress to push you to stay focused. So there is two types of stress, the one that's good for you and the one that's bad for you. The one that's good for you makes you do things and take action. The one that's bad for you will give you anxiety and panic attacks, and we want to avoid that. So I use stress to tell myself I can handle it. If I feel like I'm like really starting to get a bit like freaked out, I'm like, you know what, I can handle it. I can make that bar go up and like it's nothing, like it's air. So you kind of change the way you see things and reframe the words in your mind to make, like Dr. Naif said, is to just minimize. It's really just minimizing. That's all there is to it. Yeah.
Minimizing, I think that's what we all need to do. We've run out of time, so thank you everyone for this very enlightening discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.